Okay.
All right. Okay. So let's technology, right? Some of us in our basement, some of us are at home. This is a very timely topic, especially with FAFSA opening up in October. As a parent of 4 who are either in college or out of college, I know how important this subject is, and sometimes it kind of can seem like you're out on an island. And so we are very fortunate today to have the experts from Central Lakes College to walk us through here. I've got some personal tips and tricks at the end to share with you, and then we'll be able to open up for questions and comments. If you have any questions or comments, put them in the chat. Our Central Lakes College folks and Mid-Minnesota folks are monitoring that, and we'll be able to ask that at the end. We will also give you contact information for Mike and his team at CLC, and then contact information for myself. If there are any of these types of classes that you would like to bring to your businesses, if you can think of anywhere else this information would need to get out, please let me know. Or if there's another subject that you'd like discussed in Minnesota, I'd love to be able to help you out with that. So that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Mike Barnaby with Central Lakes College Financial Aid Office.
Thank you, Jill. Welcome. Good evening, everybody. My name is Mike Barnaby. I am the Director of Financial Aid at Central Lakes College, and our partners at Mid-Minnesota Federal Credit Union asked me and my team to kind of do a very brief overview of the financial aid and what it means and how to apply and things like that. So with that, I'd like to introduce 2 members of my team. I have Crystal Olson on board. She is our Assistant Director of Financial Aid here. And then we have Brand Phillips, who's one of our financial aid counselors. So we're here to answer your questions. Like I said, we have a very brief presentation. It'll take about 20 minutes. Please use the chat. We will have time for question and answer. And one of the last slides that we are going to provide you is with our names, our phone numbers, and our email addresses. So if you have more specific questions or you have additional questions after this is done, you can certainly get in touch with us. We are a community college here at Central Lakes College, and we serve students or families that are not even planning on attending Central Lakes College. So do not hesitate to ask us questions, and we will certainly do our best to help you through that. So what you need to know about financial aid. The things that we're going to be discussing tonight are: what is financial aid? What is the cost of attendance and the expected family contribution, or EFC, the types and categories of financial aid, and then the free application for federal student aid, or FAFSA as we call it. In a nutshell, financial aid basically consists of funds provided to students and families to help pay for post-secondary educational expenses. In other words, your college costs. The starting point of financial aid in any financial aid office around the country is what we call the cost of attendance, or budget as some schools call it. When we create a financial aid package, we have to start with the cost of attendance. Tuition and fees, room and board, books and supplies, transportation, and then miscellaneous personal expenses. The biggest factor in determining a cost of attendance from one school to another is the tuition and fees number. So at some schools, that number can be a little bit lower. At other schools, like private institutions, that number can be higher. The room and board, and the books and supplies, transportation, miscellaneous expenses, those are fairly standard from school to school around the nation. But it's the tuition and fee number that can change greatly from one school to another. The next part of the formula is what we call the expected family contribution. This is the results of when you send in the FAFSA, and we'll get to that later. But basically what the FAFSA does, it measures the students and families' ability to pay for college expenses. There's 2 parts to it. There is a student part, or student contribution, and then the parent part, the parent contribution. You add those 2 numbers together, which we get from the Department of Education through the FAFSA, is called the expected family contribution. Okay, what are the types of financial aid that are out there? There is grants and there's scholarships. We call that the good stuff. That's the money you do not have to repay. Some of that you have to qualify for, like the grants. There's federal grants, there's state grants, there's institutional grants. In most cases, you have to apply for and qualify for those types of fundings. Scholarships are usually based off of either communities, and I believe Minnesota Federal Credit Union has a scholarship that I don't know if Jill wants to talk about later or not, but that'll be up to her. Almost every college in the country has their own internal scholarship programs also. In most cases, you do have to apply for those. The next source of funding is loans. These are money, this is money that you must repay. Loans can come from the federal government. They can come from lending institutions like Mid-Minnesota Federal Credit Union and other lending institutions around the nation. So, but that is money that you also have to apply for, usually with the help of the Fafsa, but there is usually individual applications for that also, and you must repay those funds. Last source of funding is work study. Work study is where you earn money either on or on campus in a job. Jobs can be all over campus. You have to earn at least minimum wage. Some schools limit how many hours per week you can work also.
And I see on there, Mike, that you've got if the student does poorly, they make it to a situation where they need to repay some of that free money. That happened to my daughter. She had a 3.6 GPA. It got down to a 3.4 and she lost $4,000. And she didn't even realize that was part of that. So I think that's a really important thing to remember with those grants. Make sure that your student knows what parameters are around that so they work really hard not to lose that money.
Almost every type of grant and even the loans and work study programs do have minimums that you have to have. Specific scholarships like what Jill is talking about can have even higher GPA standards. Most of the grants and loans and work study, those are usually about a C average or a 2.0 average that you need to maintain to continue to receive those types of funds. But yes, there are many different stipulations. Some are even going to talk about how many credits you have to take also. So it's, as Jill said, it's very important you read the stipulations on what these grants require to keep the funding coming. The sources of financial aid where these grants and loans and work study come from, many come from the federal government. They're awarded primarily on what we call need. Need is basically a term where you have to qualify for it. You have to apply for it through the FAFSA and be eligible for it. You must apply every year for federal grants, and you do that through the FAFSA. Like I said, we'll get into that. We'll get into that later. You need to meet certain eligibility requirements. You need to be, as an example, if you are a 18-year-old male, you need to be registered with Selective Service to be eligible for certain types of federal grants. States have usually different residency requirements than the federal grants. Like the state of Minnesota here, you have to be a state resident to receive state grant or state sources of funding. Usually they're awarded on merit and need. In other words, if you've got a great GPA through the high school, there may be some grants you're eligible for also. The state has a deadline when you can receive, or when you have to apply by to receive certain sources of state funding. The state regulation regarding this is you have to apply within 30 days of the first day of the term. So as an example, if you are a senior in high school right now and you're applying for financial aid for next fall, and the classes start September 1st next fall, that school has to receive your FAFSA by September 30th of next year. Okay, so every state might have a little bit different residency categories or deadlines. It's very important that you are checking with the school that you're thinking of going to find out, are there any deadlines? Time to do that is probably fairly soon. Colleges and universities usually have their own money that they can give to students. It's very important that you check their websites or check with those admissions offices when you are working with those schools to find out, do they have any money available to you? Lastly, there's organizations like Minnesota Federal Credit Union, or could be your church affiliation, could be where your parents work. They could also have scholarships available for you too. So it's very important you just kind of keep your eyes and ears open. I know the local high schools all have scholarships within their own buildings that they give out too. So it's important to start asking those questions, especially if you're a senior now.
Again, with that deadline piece, I'm just going to put in all the ways my kids screwed up so you can learn from them. My stepson, I think, lost $5,000 to $6,000 because he did not get his FAFSA in on time. And that was at NMFCU. And it was honestly just a timing thing. He just didn't get it in on time. So that was a painful lesson in year 2.
Jill, you needed to talk with us sooner. Okay, now we're into the actual application process. It is called the free application for federal student aid. Notice the first word is free. You do not have to spend money to apply for federal or state funding. Okay. It collects information from you, both demographic and financial, in regards to how they're going to determine your family contribution. So all the questions on the FAFSA revolve around determining getting schools that EFC number. Colleges use the EFC to award financial aid. The application, the FAFSA application, is available both in English, Spanish, Braille, basically anything. It's also now available in a mobile app that if you really like using your phone, you can use your phone to apply for financial aid. The application can be filled out anytime during the academic year, but no earlier than October 1st. That's why, Jill, and this timing is so important now. October 1st was the time where you can start applying for the FAFSA for next school year. And when we say next school year, we mean the 2021-2022 school year. Okay. So you can start applying for financial aid right now for next fall school year. Colleges may have a priority date for filling out the FAFSA. So if you're starting to think about where you want to go to school next year, it's important to check their websites or call their admissions office or their financial aid office to say, do you have a priority date? A lot of the private colleges in the States have a priority date. This is the actual website where you will go to apply for the FAFSA. It's called FAFSA on the web. You need to create a login, which we'll get into in a moment. But this is what the website looks like.
And there are kind of, I want to say, fake FAFSA websites out there that will ask you for your credit card to pay $50 to process that FAFSA. That you're not on the right site if you see that.
Remember, the first word was free. If you are paying somebody to do the FAFSA, stop. You do not need to do that. That has been fairly limited in the last few years. The federal government's really cracked down on that, but I'm sure there's still a few outliers. What you are doing is you're throwing away money for no reason. If you have questions, contact the school you're thinking of going to, or contact us and we'll help you through that. We do not charge a dime for this. So when you're on the FAFSA on the web, you're basically going to be clicking the I am the student. It is very important that the student is filling out the FAFSA. This is not the parents' FAFSA. This is the student's FAFSA. A lot of the questions are geared toward both the student and the parents, but it is the student's record. When you start getting into the income questions, there's going to be a section for both the parents and the students separately that is called the IRS data retrieval tool. This is fairly new. This came about 3-4 years ago. And basically what it does is it takes your tax information and it dumps it into the FAFSA. So the stress that you have of making sure you're doing the information correctly on the FAFSA, this takes care of a lot of that for you. You do not have to use this, but there's a lot of good reasons why you would want to do this. A couple of them are, the first one is, like I said, it takes the stress away. You go in and you basically click a couple of buttons, you enter in your home address, and it grabs your tax information and dumps everything it possibly can from your taxes into the FAFSA. The second thing is schools there is a little nasty process called verification. And basically that process is where we have to verify what you have put on the FAFSA is correct. And if you are flagged for that, and it's about 30% of students around the nation get flagged for this process, we are required to collect your tax information. If you do the IRS data retrieval tool, I'm not saying you won't be flagged for verification, but your chances are greatly diminished. Okay, so that can speed up the process. Anytime you hear the word delay in financial aid, it can mean less money to you and your son or daughter. This is one way of speeding up the process.
I just want to acknowledge a chat question. Is a FAFSA application required prior to applying for grants or scholarships? And Crystal replied, some scholarships and organizations do require a FAFSA to be received by the school prior to awarding. Again, read through all the information to see what you're kind of getting yourself into. Anything else with that, Crystal?
Oh, I think that's about it. It's just important to read the fine print on the application, and if it's a scholarship or a grant that a school is offering, then make sure to confirm with the school what's being required.
Okay, there are a couple of ways to sign the FAFSA. So when you're done completing the FAFSA, it's going to say, how do you want to sign this application? So prior to going to the FAFSA, we recommend doing something called getting a federal student aid or FSA ID. Basically what this does is it signs the FAFSA. You have to create an account with the Department of Ed. The student needs to create an account, and at least one parent needs to create an account. Okay. This account follows you all through the college history. So if the son or daughter are thinking of going to a four-year school, they will use this FSA ID all through their college account. So they will use this to not only apply for the FAFSA in upcoming years, but it also is how they apply for student loans too. One parent needs to create an FSA ID and password. That also follows you. So like in Jill's case, she's got 3 or 4 kids that are going to college. She uses her FSA ID to sign the FAFSA for each one of her children. So she does not need to create a new account for every child. She has one account, and each child has an account. The owner of the account should create the FSA ID and password. In other words, the student should do that work on their own and write everything down as they're going through it, because it's going to ask for challenge questions. It's going to ask for you to create a password. Make sure you write that down, because you're going to use it every year. We find a lot of students walking into our office saying, I forgot my FSA ID and password. And yes, you can retrieve it, but it's not very easy. Sometimes we have to recommend students call the Department of Ed and get their help to retrieve that information. It's also critical that when you're creating the FSA ID and password, that the student is doing it on their own, the parent's doing it on their own, and they're putting in their own information. At times we find where even grandparents will put in the information on the student, and then things get all bungled up. So it's important to read the question, answer it correctly, and move forward.
I'd like to add to that with regard to the information needed for the FSA ID, social security number, legal name, and date of birth. Super critical that all 3 of those components are exactly right. It can really mess things up and, like Mike said, cause delays.
Data privacy is such a big deal with everybody these days. And as Crystal stated, when you are submitting the FSA ID and password and the FAFSA, it is looking for the student's legal name, their social security number, and their date of birth. If one of those things is off by a digit or a letter, all the flags get thrown up at the Department of Ed to say, who is this student? Who is this person? We need to verify this student. because it goes through multiple areas of the Department of Ed to find out, is this student actually the right person? They don't want to be giving money out to somebody who is faking an ID or what have you. So the signatures on the FAFSA is you have to have one, or the student, and then at least one parent. There are a couple ways you can submit the signature. The easiest and the quickest way to do it is doing the FSA ID electronically. You can print out the signature page and mail it in, but that does cause delays because it's got to go through the mail. And especially now, a lot of the Department of Ed is like us, working remotely from home. So they have their couriers getting information directly to people. So the easiest way is really the FSA ID and password. Frequent FAFSA errors. We kind of talked about this a little bit. The social security number, date of birth, and name, those are critical. We also see a fair amount of mistakes coming in with if there's a divorce situation or widowed or remarried. If you have anything like that type of a situation, do not hesitate to call us or call the school that you're thinking of going to, and we will walk you through whose information needs to be on the FAFSA, because that can get real confusing, especially if it's one of those types of situations. Income earned from the parent and the step parent, untaxed incomes, a lot of those things may not come across on that IRS data retrieval tool. So those things can get a little bit tricky. Taxes paid, you know, it will guide you through a lot of these things on the IRS data retrieval tool. So these things are taken out of your hands if you use that. Believe it or not, how many people are in the family is an area where we see a lot of questions and a lot of students getting it wrong. How many are in the college, or how many are going to college, I should say. Real estate and investments. These are all areas where we see a fair amount of questions on and or mistakes. It's important when you are completing the FAFSA that you're reading the question thoroughly. As an example, real estate. You do not need to include your home on the FAFSA, as your primary residence does not need to be included. But let's say you've got a cabin. You got your home here in Brainerd and you got a cabin up in Cross Lake. You don't include your home, but you got to include your cabin. Things like that. So, and those can get real confusing. Special circumstances. This is probably one of the main reasons we recommend everyone complete a FAFSA. Things change. COVID's happening right now. Every financial aid in the country has the ability to do something called special circumstances. On the FAFSA for the 21-22 school year, you will be providing your 2019 federal tax information. Well, that's going to be almost 2 years old. We realize things change. Maybe a parent lost a job, maybe a parent got sick, maybe there was a death of a parent. Those kind of things can impact a financial aid office and how much eligibility your son or daughter can have. Here are some of the things that we see on a fairly, not a lot, but we do see it quite often. These type of circumstances where you need to get in contact with the financial aid office. But the first thing the financial aid office is going to ask you is, have you submitted your FAFSA? We can't do anything about these situations until an original FAFSA has been submitted. Believe it or not, we get a fair amount of families that something has happened. There is a divorce, there is a loss of job, there is a death of one of the parents. And if they walk into our office, they're very emotional usually. And that's the first question we say is, have you submitted your FAFSA? If they say no, the only thing we can help them with is say, let's get your FAFSA submitted now. And we have to go back and use all that original information. And as you can imagine, they're in a very stressful situation already. And all they're going to hear from us is you have to submit your FAFSA.
My friend Christy wrote into the chat to everybody, from personal experience, make absolutely sure you and your students save their usernames and passwords. It is really tough to reset them. It happened to me once that I had to reset them early on. I'm gonna be truthful. I waited to get remarried until I was done filling out FAFSAs. because I didn't want to have to do it again. And that is the absolute truth, that I waited to get remarried so I didn't have to switch my FAFSA and all those kinds of things. So.
Okay, get FAFSA help here at Central Lakes College. As I stated right out of the gate, we are a community college and we are here to serve whoever walks in our door. It does not matter if they are planning on coming to Central Lakes College or not. Monday through Thursday, we take walk-ins. Lunchtime can get a little bit hairy as our staffs are getting something to eat. Call ahead if able, but basically we can help you set up the FSA ID and password. We can help you complete the FAFSA. On Fridays, please make an appointment. Staff is available between 8 and 3 p.m. We like to have them started no later than 3 p.m. because they can take some time. They may take an hour, they may take a couple hours. So we really do not like to start them after 3 p.m. Obviously, if you are a working parent and you can't come in until 5 o'clock, you need to call and let us know that that is your only option, and we can either meet over Zoom or we can meet you here at the college in a very safe environment. We must follow social distancing guidelines set up by the Minnesota Department of Health. As far as social distancing and masks, you have to have a mask. As I stated, we can also help you through Microsoft Teams or Zoom. Those are our two outreach platforms that we use here at the college.
I know that there are people on here from Detroit Lakes and Alexandria, and know that, Alex Tech and M State, and they all have these, the same departments. So again, get on. If you don't understand something, ask for help, because it can be really difficult to backtrack out and back in again. And honestly, once you do it once, it really is much easier the second time and the third time and the fourth time and the fifth time and the sixth time. So
Absolutely.
Jenny,
I know the directors at those schools, both personally, and they are wonderful people. And Jill is absolutely right. If you are not sure of something, call.
So Jenny had a question. They lost their scholarship because they modified their FAFSA due to a change in a family situation. So Crystal, are you saying, like, don't go back in and change something, or do you have to wait till it's processed before you go back in and change? What if there's a change in the middle of the process?
My advice would be to not correct your FAFSA unless you check with the school. Once the school has received your FAFSA, and especially after a award offer has been made, an award notification has been received, I would definitely check with the school before you make any changes to your FAFSA whatsoever.
Let me give a very brief example of something that we see once in a while. Family submits the FAFSA, didn't read the fine print where it basically says, do not report pennies. They do not want pennies on the form. So you report your income and it looks like $100,000 or $250,000 when it should be $25,000. You get the FAFSA results back. The school sees this. The school isn't going to change it. They can't change it. We're not allowed to change it. But the family sees it and says, oh my, I didn't make $250,000 last year or in 2019. We do not want you to go back in and make that change. We want you to contact the school. Obviously, that's a fairly extreme reason, but we want you to contact the school because, number one, maybe it's something that doesn't need to be changed. Number two is, if it needs to be changed and we can verify it needs to be changed, we can do it for the family. We can do it electronically and get it done correctly and quicker. So contact the school. If you submit the FAFSA and you know you made a mistake on it, contact the school they're thinking of going. They'll walk you through what their process is and get it done right the next time. Once again, you don't want to delay this. You want to get it done as quickly but correctly as soon as possible.
And keep in mind too that schools and offices are likely going to request some sort of documentation with regard to any of those types of changes. So kind of be prepared to offer that up or find out what it is they're going to ask for before submitting that to the Department of Education, because we have to make sure that we have everything on file if an auditor were to pick a file and say, you know, why did you do this?
Okay, here's probably one of the most important slides. Here's our information. You have our email addresses. Email works really, really good in this when we're working remotely. Some of us don't have as quick access to our phones as we would like. So, but we are monitoring email all the time. So do not hesitate to contact us. We're here to serve, and we will get back to you as soon as we possibly can as far as any questions you might have.
And this is being recorded, and by the end of the week, it'll be on the Mid-Minnesota Federal Credit Union website for anybody to look at if you want to go back through it, or if you're a parent on here and want your kid to go through it and watch it, it'll be available to you. So, so just a couple of things that, you know, so I go into high schools as part of my job and do personal finance classes. And this is just a couple slides that I utilize with my students. And Mike talked about, you know, I look at things as the free, the cheap, and the gap. You know, Mike talked about those grants. That's your free money that you do not have to pay back. And it is helpful if you fill out, you know, for the schools, depending on, you know, what's going on, to have that FAFSA filled out. Scholarships, of course, that's your free money. There's a study out there that I read about 2 years ago that said if students really put their minds to it, they can make up to about $300 per hour that they spend researching and putting the time into scholarships. I sit on quite a few scholarship committees, and I'll give you some tips at the end with that. And then again, your foundations. I know specifically in Brainerd, the Brainerd Public Schools Foundation has a portal, a website. You go in, put your information in, and it matches you with scholarships. So I would really highly suggest that students go to their high schools or their colleges to look to see what are available. Then there's the cheap. So your cheap loans are your federal student loans. Those are going to be the cheapest loans you can get for the most part. So I always suggest that people do those first. And then if there's money left over that you need to get, there's your gap. So then there's private student loans. So I will tell you that if you come to Mid-Minnesota asking about our student loans, our first question should be, have you filled out your FAFSA? Because those are going to be your cheap student loans. Once you start going private, there's no ceiling on the rates and things like that. So those can get to be very expensive. Home equity line of credit. Right now, rates are really, really low. I know, you know, a couple people that they're taking out a home equity line of credit at a very low rate to pay for the school. Credit cards. Again, if you're in my classes, I'm not going to advise anybody to put this on a credit card. But I think people get desperate, and I work with a teacher who didn't realize that every year you have to fill out your FAFSA. So he missed a sophomore year, and he said, I think I'm still paying for those credit card bills. And finally, your savings. Obviously, being able to use your savings, having your kids save. With my kids, they always worked very, very hard during the summer, so they didn't have to work so hard during the school year as part of that. And really putting together a budget. How much do you need? So once you kind of figure out the school and get that FAFSA in, you're going to get that estimated family contribution. And that was a little sticker shock for me when I got that, my first level of contribution. Where's the money going to come from? And again, like Mike talked about before, there's the cost of tuition and there's a cost of attendance. And so many colleges will make it, four-year colleges, they'll have to live on campus the first year or 2 years of that. So that's a big part of that budget. And again, you got to pay that tuition on time. You could end up on probation. It could affect, really a lot of your grants and your scholarships and things like that also. Some money saving tips, accelerate your degree. So my oldest graduated a semester early because he took some summer classes that worked for him. My daughter, who goes to Moorhead right now, will graduate a year early because of how she structured her classes. She also went to Central Lakes College her senior year. She still participated in her activities at Brainerd High School, but she knew she knew the school she was going to, the college, and she knew kind of what program she was going into. So she really aligned her high school classes to guarantee that they would transfer to Moorhead State. And it was a very easy process for her. And like I said, she'll graduate a year early. Or college in the schools. Lots of good options for college and the schools that will transfer. Be a transfer student. My oldest daughter got 2 years at CLC, lived at home. I get nobody wants to do that, but she graduated in May from University of Minnesota Duluth with $3,000 in student loans. So, that saving money was very beneficial to her. And go where you're wanted. I think sometimes either we as parents or our kids get into their head of, this is the school I've always wanted to go to. I'm not going to apply anywhere else. I was doing this presentation at a high school classroom, and the kid in the front row, his dream and his parents' dream was for him to go to Notre Dame. The kid was very, very smart. Okay. And so I pulled up a financial calculator and we added up what his student loan payments would be based on going to Notre Dame for 10 years after he graduated. And he almost fell over in his chair. The same kid applied to North Dakota State University and got a full ride. So again, I challenge you. My daughters went to school for a music degree and really wanted to go look at the school in Boston. I looked at the school and it was $60,000 a year. We're not going to go look at that school. You're not going to be a doctor. You're going to go to school for music. Has really enjoyed her time at Moorhead State. It's an extremely affordable school. It's worked out really well for her. So again, I think, challenge to even just apply to a couple different schools. And I think you'd be surprised at the packages that you get back. And again, depending on your job, once you get out, there are some community service programs, VISTA. If you're going to be a doctor, if you go work in rural schools or rural communities, there's some federal programs that can help pay back some of those student loans. So I think that's always worth. They're not easy to do, but it's always very much worth researching. And again, look for those best deal colleges. Bemidji and Southwest State, just here in Minnesota, are kind of a national best deal college just for our state. So take a look. Again, I challenge to do your research, look at the costs. I don't think I've ever been asked what college I went to. So just going to put that out there. And then again, apply for scholarships. So again, I sit on scholarship committees. Here's my take. If it's an essay question, answer the question. Right? So we can tell when people have just copied and pasted one essay from one scholarship to the other. Make it very personal. Use your personal experiences, their personal stories. Be creative with them. And then proofread it. Then have somebody else proofread it. Then have somebody else proofread it, and then proofread it one more time. One scholarship committee that I sit on, I think we read about 1,000. 500 word or less essays. If you're at 505 words, you're in the garbage because you didn't follow the rules and it was one way of weeding out. If the grammar and things like that are really, really terrible, it makes it very difficult for us to get through and get the true essence of what you're saying in that scholarship. So, and don't be afraid of applying for a smaller scholarship. And I look at Central Lakes College. My daughter got a $500 scholarship with it paid for her books. It was a very easy process. And boy, it was really nice not to have to pay for books for a couple semesters. So that's a big challenge I always put out to all the students that I work with. The Minnesota Credit Union Foundation. So there's a group that all of us credit unions belong to. So if you are a member of a credit union, doesn't have to be in Minnesota, there's a link here. That's a 500 word or less essay. Knowing the power that we have the power today to change the story of tomorrow, how will you prepare for future financial obstacles? Reflect on your personal and your family's experiences. Again, it's 500 words or less. These are $1,000 scholarships, and they both have traditional and non-traditional. So I put the link there. We have a link on Mid-Minnesota's website also. So I wanted to make sure to put that out there because that's a good one. Jenny, that this scholarship is for both traditional and non-traditional. So if they're already in college, if they haven't graduated yet, they're welcome to be able to apply for that scholarship. And Jenny also said it's a nice thing about applying for multiple schools that they might offer scholarships that you can use to price compare. And again, like she said, we didn't mention this, you can kind of utilize school A with school B, saying, if you really want me, school A offered me this, will you match that? It's negotiation. I don't think people necessarily know that they can do that. Oops. Any other questions? You can put it in the chat, or any kind of last minute thoughts.
One thing that I want to bring up real briefly, and Jill touched on this, is I do think it's important to apply to multiple schools. At least fill out the FAFSA for multiple schools for sure. Number one, it's free. And I believe the FAFSA allows you to do up to 10 different schools. So it does not hurt to put down 2 or 3 or 4 or even 5 schools on the FAFSA. You'll get communications from every one of those schools. Anyone have any questions that they don't want to use on the chat, they want to ask personally, or we're here for you.
Mike, there was a question that Anne posed. Is there a good resource for scholarships? Where should parents or students look if they're looking for the scholarships that might be available?
That's a great question. If they're in high school, I would start with their high school. Their high school counselors usually have a book of some sort that will give them a lot of different scholarship opportunities. On our Central Lakes College website, which is www.clcmn.edu. If you click on financial aid, we have a other resources page where we have done some research to make sure these are creditable places. These are national scholarships. What I do not recommend doing is spending money to apply for scholarships. Over the years, this has kind of come through fruition, and basically you are really not paying to get money. In other words, if they're asking you for $100, they are not going to find you money. They're going to find you applications, which is the same thing you can do by going to our website. And maybe even Jill has a suggestion, seeing she's been through it fairly recently, but our website will give different multiple scholarship search engines that you can certainly use.
And my go-to is always your high school's counselor's office as the starting point, because they are able to connect you with the community resources, which are easier to get than some of those national ones. So that would be my suggestion, is go to the counselor's office. I don't know what all the schools use, but any school that I've worked in, they've been extremely helpful.
Another great resource is going to each college's website. They will list in most cases, they will list all the different scholarships students can apply for or be eligible for. So I would not hesitate to go to whatever school you're thinking of going to, their website. Like here at Central Lakes College, we have our own foundation, as Jill said, and the students can apply for those scholarships within a timely basis. And almost every school is going to have something like that.
Don't forget about service organizations. Parents that belong to any type of a service organization, very often they will have a scholarship as well. And so you might have an in with regard to getting your student a little bit of money.
And then there's some organizations that also offer some really reasonable loans. I know that my mom is a member of PEO, and they've got a really nice loan program. AEUW has a really nice loan program and grant programs that are kind of outside of this. So I agree, Krista, look at the different groups and things like that. And sometimes you can only get those if your child, if you're a member, that's what it's really limited to. The builders associations around your areas, if your kid's going into school for building or construction or things like that, there's some really specific things there. Somebody asked the save option. You know, there's a couple different ways of saving for college. I can tell you with my kids, they slung a lot of drinks in the summer around Gull Lake, put a lot of hours in, you know, to pay for their school. But I would also talk to your financial advisor for some of those tax, you know, breaks as you look at some of those IRAs and things like that. So if you're a parent of a young child, the longer you go, you know, the more options that you'll have.
Brant and Crystal, how are we doing on the chat? We pretty much up to speed, or is
We
there
just had
questions?
one more question come in. We scroll up. Some scholarships are very school specific. If the school is one of your choices but haven't committed to the school, can you still apply? That could very well be up to the school. Likely, the student would have to be admitted before they'd be considered for the scholarship. But being admitted is just a step in the process. You can be admitted to several different schools. You can receive scholarship offers or award offers at several different schools and still make an informed decision with regard to where you want to go. I think we're caught up.
So again, if you think of any other questions, again, they'll be posted out there. Mike's information is out there, or go to the Central Lakes College website. Contact us at Mid-Minnesota. Again, we can, you know, have some conversations too if you need some help from the saving end or the borrowing end. But thanks for coming on, and good luck. And kudos to you for getting on this early and getting ahead of the process. That's one of the, I always say, if you apply early, if you have a problem, it's not going to be as big of a problem. It's when you wait a long time and there's a problem is when you start to get into trouble. So again, thank you everybody so much for coming on. We appreciate your time. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Jill and Miranda. Thanks, Crystal and Brant.
Can you stop recording, Mike?
Yes.
Thank you.
And Jill, I did